So welcome everybody. My name is Gandhi Leroy. I'm a professor here in MIS, and besides teaching and doing my research, I focus my service on diversity and inclusion and equity. So this is a program that has existed for a few years. We have different components. One of our fabulous components is the Leaning Circles. Do we have Leaning members here? You guys are great. You have a lot of activities. This counts as one of your activities because we collaborate, right? But also, we have this speaker series every spring. And so if you attend 3 events and you complete the mini quiz, then you can get a certificate of completion. We'd like you to come in person, but we also provide these lectures online if you can't make it. But of course, this is a lot more fun when we have our speakers to have a great audience like this. So we do like it that you come in person. Today's speaker, let me see, anything else? Yeah, so the official title of our program is Tomorrow's Leaders Equipped for Diversity. So don't delete those emails when you see them in your email box. It's about all of us, it's relaxed. We have our speaker today. I'll introduce her in a minute. We'll have lunch afterwards. If it gets a little bit noisy, ignore it. There will be enough for everybody after the talk. So today we have Kate Goldman, and she changed jobs pretty recently, and she is now the Director of People Services for the Center for Biological Diversity. In case you wonder what kind of degree she has, from the University of Arizona, she has a bachelor's in environmental economics. And she also has an MBA from a place we will not name. She just stepped down, rotated off, and she is the past president of the Society of Human Resource Management here in Greater Tucson. And she is also an advocacy director on the board of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. I could say a lot more, but I think she has a slide with a little bit of introduction about herself. So I'm going to leave it up to her. Stay until the end. At the end, we're going to go through the quiz and complete the quiz together, and then you can return that to me. We will also have a sign-up sheet go around, try and fill it out quietly. Kate?
Well, thanks everybody for being here today. I'm really excited. Let me start my timer. Tell you a little bit about myself before we get going. My name's Kate Goldman. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Like Gandhi already said, I'm the Director of People Services, which is just fancy for HR, where I work. DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is kind of my jam. I love it. It falls nicely under the umbrella of HR, and that's how I've kind of created a career in HR. But every chance I get, I try and work in DEIA stuff. And the only thing she left out is that I'm a retired roller derby athlete here in town. Anybody ever been to a roller derby bout? No. Have you been to one here in Tucson? Tucson roller derby maybe? Flat track? Awesome. Okay. So it's a lot of fun. I figured like at age 30 it was a good time to try a new thing. And that's when I started playing, and it was a great experience. And it teaches you a lot about mental toughness, which kind of brings me into my topic today. Surprise, surprise, I'm a white lady, in case you haven't noticed. And I do love talking about DEIA, although in reality, this isn't something that maybe affects me as much. I'm very aware of my privilege, just being skin color alone. That alone. And I've got loads of other privilege, and we're going to talk all about that. But I just wanted that disclaimer right away. So for any of you that are here because you kind of like DEI stuff, so not just for credit or whatever, but it piques your interest, you're curious, you're interested in it, you might be thinking like, why is this privileged white lady talking about this topic? And hopefully by the end of this, I'll share with you what I have to offer. This is something I care a lot about. So kind of like in preparation of being here and being all intimidated with all these like business people, entrepreneurs and leaders, I had to think, how do I make my business case? I hate saying that because DEIA should matter to you because you're a decent human being and you have blood coursing through your veins as far as I'm concerned. But I always have to think about that. I have to think about what's my business case. So the most obvious thing I did was I went to y'all's website and I looked on the Eller Management, College of Management, and I looked at the mission statement. And right away, this popped out at me. Discover and share new knowledge and educate the next generation of responsible global leaders. So truly, if you are somebody that wants to be a part of the community, DEIA can and should matter to you, whether it's just a bottom line, whether it's a personal reason, or both, different combinations. So I hope to reach you all wherever you're at today in one of those manners and funnel that down. This is important to me. Before we get going, because this can be controversial, and Gandhi has told me this has to be upbeat, and it will be upbeat, but it can be a touchy topic, and I'm not going to avoid difficult things because the whole point of this is to be able to talk about them in a really productive way. So I just do want to kind of like go grade school here and say, like, these are some of our agreements. We're not going to do this, and if you can't adhere to this, then I politely ask you to not. But listen, actively listen. So when somebody else is talking, try not to be on your phone or doing something else. If you need to step out, if you need to leave early, by all means, do your thing. But let's be respectful when somebody else is talking and not interrupt. I also want to add in, there are people from different parts of society, different cultures, where speaking up is actually rude, or maybe they just don't tend to be a speaker upper person. I'm very introverted, but I'm an outgoing introvert. So sometimes I really shut down. If you notice your friends or colleagues or people, we're all friends here, right? We're all friends, just relax. If you notice your friends not speaking up over and over and you've been coming forward and speaking, maybe invite them to share. I just wanted to add that. Use I statements. I definitely want you to participate. You don't need me up here for 15 minutes just talking at you, so please speak. But use I, not we or they, for sure. The ouch rule. Nobody's ever used this, but it's important, and I'm going to put it out there. If somebody says something and it doesn't land quite right, we're all learning right now, and I kind of feel like it's cheesy, but I'm going to say this is a safe space. We're all learning right now. That doesn't mean what you say doesn't matter, but give somebody the opportunity to be like, hey, ouch, that kind of landed wrong. This is how I took that, and give the other person an opportunity to be like, that's not what I meant. Let me try again. Because I'm by no means this like perfect, I say the wrong things. I'm still learning. It's an ongoing process. We're going to suspend judgment and try and be open to learning. Remember, nobody's going to be arresting you at the door if you say something that's not perfect. I hope, right? Okay, good. Thank goodness. All right. So we're going to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. This will still be fun. 3 main points that I want to hit on. We are going to do a little bit of a self-assessment to see where you're at. We all see the world in a different way. Obviously, we're all different people. So we need to check in with that before we kind of analyze what's going on. I also want to make sure we're having a foundational agreement on literacy. So for example, you won't hear me use the word guys a whole lot. I try and say y'all, and I'm not from the South necessarily, but I'm trying to say you all as respectful, taking gender out of assuming that everybody in here is part of that dominant culture. So this is just a little thing. So I just want to get a foundational agreement kind of going. So we will talk about some literacy stuff, and we're in the university, so I know you're all into academia, and that'll be fun. And lastly, we're going to shake the fragility. Who in here has heard the term fragility when we're talking about DEIA? Nobody? Legit? Nobody? One person. Can you tell me a little bit, sorry to put you on the spot, but can you tell me a little bit about what you think like that means?
My understanding is that fragility talks about how one person interacts with the general culture and how they might be quote unquote fragile, how things from the culture might impact them in different ways than it might impact other people.
Nice, that's great. So she said, I'm going to try and paraphrase, how if I'm of a different culture and I receive some information or feedback or something, how I act might be fragile. I'm just going to add to that. It's kind of like your defense mechanism. So it's like your knee-jerk reaction that you do without thinking about it. Right when somebody says like, hey, what you just said was really insensitive and kind of rude, and like, we don't use that word anymore. Like, it's those statements that I've had to say to my grandma, like, Grandma, we don't say that anymore. You have to stop. And instead of her being like, oh, sorry, that makes me feel bad, I shouldn't say that. Instead, we kind of like make excuses around it. That's your fragility kicking in. But we're smart people here. We're going to evolve past that and try and shake that so that we can get down to some concrete stories and past it. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Has anybody ever heard of this? Any psychology, like extracurricular classes? So this is a really fun one I love. When we have almost no information about anything, we think that we know everything, right? We have one experience maybe with somebody from a group, a certain population, and all of a sudden we know them. We get like, oh no, I had this one, it was an experience I had. It's not just anecdotal, like I was there and I met them and I know they're this and they're that and they're the other thing. And maybe as we get to know it better, we start to learn, that's where it takes that dip, right? Where we actually learn, there's more to this than I thought, and we get some self-awareness. This is kind of where the humility and the fragility kick in. We start realizing we don't know everything we think we know. Maybe get a little embarrassed because you also see like you kind of thought you were know it all about it, and you really start to learn. And as you become an expert and more, and you're working that muscle, you realize this is way more complicated than I thought. So again, I just bring this up to say, again, it's okay if you don't know something. It's okay if some of the terminology I bring up makes you uncomfortable or you feel like it's a foreign word. We're going to talk about it and we're going to get through these definitions. We're all starting in the same place. So for those that don't already kind of know anything about DEIA or why it's important, I'm going to start with the why. And I'm going to try and break it down in what I think is a really simple way. So I'm going to put a prompt up. I don't want you to talk to your neighbor. We're going to start by doing this alone. I'm going to give you a couple seconds, and you're going to write down all the things that come to mind when I show you this prompt. Anything. Adjectives, feelings, actions, whatever it is, the most obvious things that come to mind when I show you this prompt. And folks at home, you can write it down too. I'll give you a timer. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Tell me about a dog. Go. Just write down a list of as many things you can think of. What color is it? What position is it in? What is it doing? Write down any feelings associated. As many as you can think of, as quickly as you can. All right, and stop. Okay, so I'm just gonna call on a couple people. Tell me, I just wanna know the number, how many things you thought of. So just count how many you wrote down. How many did you write down?
4.
4? 3? 5? 5?
8.
8? 7? 3? 7. Okay, so we have a mix of some people that were just like, kind of like starting to just get the juices flowing and some that were really writing down. So what I want to do is I want you to get in, this is going to be tricky without really moving chairs, but I want you to turn around and work in group of like 4 or 5 and just share what you had on the list. Now, what you're going to do, and somebody's going to have to be fast because we're not going to spend too much time on this, is go down your list and I want you to just tell me in your group how many you had in common with everybody in your group, and just groups of 4 or 5. So if somebody says wagging tail, everybody has to have that in the group, otherwise it doesn't count. Ready? Go. I'm going to be asking for some volunteers. You can always pass. But I want to know, let's see, out of all the different groups, and there were quite a few, how many people got 100% of what they wrote down? Everybody in your group got that. Anybody? No? Okay. How many people got 5 things all the same? Just 5. That's it, just 5. Nope? How about 4? Yeah? Can you tell us what your 4 were? Just out of curiosity.
Loyal, number 1, number 2, playful or friendly, cute, we all have cute, and yeah, I think happy.
And happy, nice. Loyal, playful, cute, and happy, nice. Okay, so that's 4. How about 3? Anybody have 3 in common? One more back there. Did you have any of the same ones that they did? Did you have any different? All the same? Playful, lovable, nice. 2? 2 groups? Okay, did you all, have anything different than what was already said?
I'd say emotional support.
Emotional
Sharing was one common thing.
Okay, nice. Did everybody have at least one, all the same? How many people, raise your hand if your group did not have even one the same. Raise your hand. Okay, so that's well over half the room. So obviously, what does this little exercise exhibit? Everybody's different. We all have a different perspective, and it's pretty non-threatening to talk about a dog. And when I've done this exercise, I'm like, really, people? Brown, fuzzy, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And everybody has something different, and it blows my mind of just where our mind goes. And it's a really easy exercise. So again, I just want to get the juices flowing of where I'm going with this and where it's coming from, so we can get ready for the kind of more hard, heavy lifting mental work here. So moving into the real why, because there are people who are kind of like, man, get over it. Like, this country's amazing, and we have all these things that, people can do, and all these rights, and we're not gonna be able to tackle everything today. I could talk about this endlessly. We're gonna scratch the surface, not even scratch the surface, we're gonna dust the surface off of DEIA and the world and systemic oppression, and how this is gonna feed into a global world and economy and making this place better for all of us. But it is important to know that it definitely hasn't gone away. So in case you are one of the few people in here that's lucky to have never, ever experienced anything where somebody's made any assumption about you, particularly for your physical attributes, then great. But for a lot of people in here, at some point or another, people have made an assumption, and it's not so great. And it's worse, obviously, for people where the physical assumption can be more clearly seen. I really like this quote. In this country, American means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate. I don't know how that makes you feel, but it makes me really uncomfortable. African American, Hispanic American, Native American, Indian American, Asian American. So it's just something to think about, right? And this isn't intentional. If I go to, okay, draw me an American girl, what's my girl gonna look like compared to other people's? And race isn't everything, and again, there's so many complex layers that I'm not going to be able to unpack today, but I just wanted to bring it up to the surface so that we can talk about it. It's a pretty easy one that helps me illustrate. Again, because we're talking about the work world, I feel like this is a really important one. Raise your hand if you identify as female in here, please. Okay, so at least half the room. Well, then it should matter to you that on day 1 of the calendar year, has anybody seen this little example before? No? A couple heads nodding. So on day 1, we're going to call it the white man makes $10. Well, it's going to take almost 64 days, and this is outdated, so a little bit. 64 days for Asian women to get about the same, 109 for white women, 233 for black women, 324 for Hispanic women, again, to make that same $10. That's all we're talking about. Native American women aren't even on here. They won't make it in the first year. Again, I can't unpack, we won't solve the world's problems today, but it's very, very real, and it's very relevant in our society. Just again, with unemployment, since we're here and we're in an institution of learning, what that actually looks like for Just these little comparisons. So if the national average is only 3.4, if you're a woman or you identify or you're perceived that way, you're already a little bit screwed. And apparently the darker your skin color is, especially if you're black, you're in a worse place. So whether you buy into this and whether this is something that you face, this is what's going on around you. And it's important to be aware of. We're going to talk about intersectionality, which is why I wanted to show this one. We're not going to have time to dive too deep into it today. But I am going to talk about how you can't just stay in one lane. So me saying that I'm a feminist and I care about women and women's rights and whatever that means to me is great, but not if all I focus on is white women and white women's causes. So that's where intersectionality comes in, and none of us just stay in one lane. Not even me, as a white girl. I'm not in one lane. So we all have to think about that. So kind of like carrying it into workplaces and the leaders that you're going to be and the companies you're going to work for and the teams you're going to lead and the bosses you're going to be, we want to believe that that's all over and done with, but maybe you've heard of a little coffee shop named Starbucks. Yeah, maybe you've had a drink there once in a while, like free advertising. You know what happened a while ago there, right? How was this for their branding? Do you want your company to be the one to have this mark of kicking somebody out because of an assumption? It's not going to be good for you. We're constantly seeing in headlines all the time that even though this stuff, it's the same stuff, and we've been talking about it for a long time. Like, we already went through civil rights. We've already gone through these wars. Why is this still an issue? It still is an issue. And it's definitely an issue, even at a place like Tesla, which is groundbreaking, right? No place is perfect and you're not going to be devoid of it. So it is up to you to be able to speak up. And hopefully today I'm going to be able to help you feel like you can. Kind of pulling it into the HR world, we wear a hat of pseudo-employment lawyers when we need to in our respective companies. So this is what we see a lot. We're going to talk about the protected classes. These are some of them right here. But our lawsuits, especially for retaliation, so that's bringing a claim forward and then something bad happening that affects my pocketbook, those have been the highest of all of them, meaning I can't talk about it. So even if I talk about it, I'm concerned. And one of, I feel like it's kind of a hot topic right now, has to do with trans rights in the workplace. This is a startling number, 90%. That's a lot. 90% of transgender workers feel or report harassment at work. I want to take a quick, I want to just test, I don't know if anybody's like got a really good eye or an illustration background or graphics. Does anybody recognize this font and know what company posted this? Anybody? I wish I knew the name of the font. I don't know the name. Anybody recognize it?
Oh.
Take a guess.
Ben and Jerry's.
Yes! Oh my gosh! I should have bought a treat. Should have bought Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's! And can somebody else nice and loud kind of shout out what this is about? You don't have to read the whole thing, but what is the gist of what's posted up here? Somebody who's not too shy. I don't want to pick on you.
Still a thing, but it's just shifted to a different form to mask what it really is.
Nice. I'm going to repeat that. Slavery is still a thing, but it's just shifted to mask what it really is. Why is an ice cream company like Ben & Jerry's, based out of, aren't they Vermont or New Hampshire? Vermont, like nice little place. Why are they putting this on their website? What could they possibly be trying to do? Y'all are the ones going to be working with the big companies, changing the world. So why would a company do this? Does slavery impact their bottom line at all? Are they in the business of social justice? No. They're not dealing with economic, and suppression. Racism, that's not something they're fighting. Go ahead.
If this depiction is put on their, little ice cream things you probably get at the store, kind of like milk cartons. It's exposure is exposing everybody to, hey, this is still an issue.
Right. So why would an ice cream company want to talk about slavery? And in so much detail. This is from their website, and there was a lot.
We're all human.
We're all human.
Maybe to emphasize that they do not support it and not against it.
They don't support it and they're against it. And why does that matter?
Because,
They just sell ice cream.
again, it's a company, it's not just about selling the ice cream, it's about a company who gives humans their jobs and everything, so they do not support it and they want others as a company, not as just ice cream company, to follow that as well.
Right. I'm going to paraphrase just because I have the mic. But basically, as a company, they don't support it. They deal with human beings. They want to make sure that the world knows that us as a company, this is still going on, and we're not afraid to talk about it. And by the way, does anybody know if Ben or Jerry happen to be black? They're not. So this is powerful, and I just want to plant that seed of no matter what your plot in life is or what you choose for it to be, you can choose the influence you want to have. Not everybody has to be out there hitting the pavement like me doing protests or something like that. That's not everybody's calling. That's fine. But there's a way that you can have an impact and an influence. And if you have an ounce of privilege, I ask you, I challenge you to just use it for good. That's all. When we're getting down to like the nitty gritty, the bare minimum, when you go to your employers and you're not quite running the company yet, you will be responsible for not breaking certain laws and costing your company lots of money and hefty fines and lawsuits should any of these things be violated. So has anyone ever heard of Title VII? No? Okay, so Title VII has to do with protected rights. It was passed in 1964. It's on your quiz. And so you might want to write it down. It has to do with 5 specific protected classes that in 1964, the federal government finally said, okay, fine, you will get in trouble if we can prove that you discriminate based on just these 5 things. Anyone want to guess what they are? Do you know?
Gender, color,
Not gender, but close.
race,
Sex. Sex. Sex is one. Somebody else I heard. Go ahead.
National origin.
National origin.
color,
Color. I think somebody said race. And nope, that came later. But that's good. And age is protected, but that's 80. Sorry? No, that came later too. Disability, Americans with Disabilities Act. Religion. Who said that? Yay, religion. So race, color, national origin, which are all very closely related. Sex, not gender, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And religion. So the government, the federal government said, fine. I cannot just say like, I'm not going to hire you because you're Christian. I'm not going to hire you because you're Jewish. I'm not going to hire you because you worship the spaghetti monster. Fine. That's it. When it comes to sex, that one is going to have a big asterisk because that's become kind of like evolved into many other things. But that's just at the highest federal level. The EEOC, does anyone know what that stands for? Just shout it out if you know. Anyone? No? Go ahead.
Equal employment opportunities.
Commission, yes, awesome. Round of applause for her. She did it. Yay, that's awesome. Thank you, I appreciate it. I love participation. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So they're basically the police that enforce when Title VII has been violated, when folks have been discriminated against in the workplace. So you'll hear about EEOC and people's rights, and that's who you go complain to if you've been discriminated against. So at the federal level, we have incorporated more things, but honestly, at the municipal and state level, that's really where things kind of percolate up. That's where the laws and the change really begin to happen. So in New York City, for example, they passed a law costing each person or employer $250,000 for every time that you intentionally misgender somebody. That's a lot. California just passed a law that every employee has to get sexual harassment training, and it includes trans rights in the workplace. But this stuff is still brand new, and at the federal level, it's not protected. It's really important. This is a more inclusive list of what at some level is protected, but I highlighted just kind of the federal ones. So somebody earlier said age. So tell me a little bit about age. Is an 18-year-old protected the same as a 50-year-old? What does age mean? Does anyone know? Take a guess.
You can't be fired if you're too old.
You can't be fired if you're too old, right? And we have to not discriminate when it comes to anything about your employment. So that goes down to even like how I post my job descriptions. I might not want to say an energetic, fresh eyes and young blood, or you have to think about all these little things that are tiny little microaggressions, little things that send a message that like, okay, I'm too old for this. They want a young kid. It has to be fast-paced, and they're gonna see me as somebody who's too old. So the age part is at 40. That's the cutoff, which 40 is totally young, by the way, can I just say? But 40 is the cutoff. So 40 and above is protected, as well as disability and all these other things. Sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression are very, very, very new on the horizon, and it's because of sex. That's the only reason they're even getting a chance to be protected. Otherwise, they wouldn't be protected at all. And again, that's not at the federal level. So you're like, whoa, pump the brakes. I'm totally woke AF. Well, we're not going to say woke anymore, okay? Let's not appropriate that. We're not going to say that word. But I'm trying really, really hard. All right, cool. So let's talk about microaggressions and when we accidentally do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing.
Can you please differentiate between gender, sex, and sexual orientation?
I love it. Yes, I totally. So he asked, can I differentiate between gender, sex, and sexual orientation? I'm going to start with gender and sex first because those two go hand in hand. Actually, I'm going to open it up to the room. Who knows the difference between gender and sex? Any idea? Hi, sorry.
Sex is the biological part, and gender is your identity.
Perfect, that's it. Sex is the biological part. Think about your bits and pieces, okay? So sex is usually assigned at birth. It's like, oh, this is the genitalia. There's a binary, one or the other. You're either male or female. Gender identity is much more fluid. So I can be a cis, we call it cis female, which means my parts match kind of how I identify. So I'm a cis female. But I can still be maybe less femme. I'm more male presenting. I personally love makeup. I'm pretty femme. But that's where it starts to, identity can get really complicated, and there's no basic cut and dry. The binary is the cut and dry of male and female, and that's sex. Gender can be the identity. Great question. And sexual orientation is not even related. So anybody of any sex, of any gender identity, can be any sexual orientation. That's a whole nother class, but we'll get into that. So we are going to talk a little bit about literacy. I think it's a really good time to do so. I want to just start with the very first one, microaggressions and what a microaggression. Can I see your hand if you've heard the term microaggression? Oh, thank goodness. Okay, so at least half the class, you've heard it, but not everybody, and that's fine. So microaggression is basically usually unintended. So it's hopefully, I say something like, God, you're so pretty for a girl. And you're like, thank you, I think. So it's an unintended insult or a slight or a snub, or like, you're so fast for an older person. Okay, thanks. They're usually in the form of jokes that are probably outdated and we need to leave in the past. But they can be things like that. You've heard about people trying to touch someone's hair who's different. Totally inappropriate, don't do that. Those are all, I don't even know if that's a microaggression, that's more like a macroaggression. But microaggressions are these slight, everyday, unintended slights or snubs that insult people and it degrades them. We already talked about privilege, so it's an unearned benefit. So just my skin color is an unearned benefit. If the cops pull me over, I might be worried, but it's certainly not because of my skin color. That's for sure. That has never been a reason for me to be concerned. That's a privilege I have. All right. Gender versus sex. So he is ahead of the curve. So gender is that identity, and sex is just the biological piece. Cisgender, which you'll hear me refer to sometimes, is just when they match. So I'm cisgendered because I was born a female and identify as female. Intersectionality and fragility we already discussed earlier. So I'm gonna give you a little activity in a minute here. We're gonna talk about your lens. You're gonna look at this. It's coming, yeah, it's coming. On my little cute, pretty simple glasses example. And like she already said earlier up here in the front row, we all have a different lens. So it's gonna start with you. It's really easy to be like, oh my gosh, let me tell you about Betty. Betty is so inappropriate. Betty does this, Betty this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's great. And you might be right about Betty, and Betty like needs to go. But I promise you, we all have unconscious bias. We all have perspective. We all have a makeup from where we came from that it just colors it. It colors it for better, for worse, whatever. There's no judgment. It's not a problem unless you're oblivious to it. So what does that mean? I have certain biases. If I'm alone in a park and I see someone who looks like a man, right away, what do you think happens? I'd like somebody to just shout out what you think happens to me. It's a dark park. I see a man. I'm by myself. I'm scared. It's just a man. That's a bias I have. That's my training to stay safe. Go ahead.
Wouldn't you consider that instinct, though?
But it's a bias. So what it is, bias is a lot like instinct, right? It's a knee-jerk reaction. You have an instinct to breathe. You don't have to think about that. When we're putting a bias on somebody else, you can train your brain around it. Just think about something simple like mice being trained in like a maze with food, right? We can train ourselves. So what I'm gonna do, by yourself, real quick, I want you to write down the lens from which you see the world. But I'm gonna get vulnerable with you myself first. And you can take this as deep or as light as you want, and you don't have to share any of it. But I'd like you to write at least one thing on each side. Can anybody tell me how I separated my two lenses? What do you think? Just take a guess. Go ahead, shout it out.
Internal versus external.
There's some internal and external, but what's the main difference between this side and this side? Say it again.
Career, I guess. I mean, this one looks more like work and career oriented because you mentioned higher education there. I'm just saying. Think so?
About yourself.
They're all about myself.
The right side is more what like society thinks is a privilege.
Yes.
The left side is what could not be a privilege in the eyes of society.
Did everybody hear that? This is how I'm privileged. I inherited these things. I didn't necessarily like earn them. I was born with them. And where I live and where I've grown up, this has worked well for me. These things have given me a certain door open or a step up or whatever, a safety net at minimum that other people just haven't had, or they have to do extra work just to have it. These are my privileges. These I call kind of like what I have that's unearned or whatever that I just inherited, or it's a part of me and my identity that I call my quick start to empathy learning. These are the obstacles, this kind of traits that I have that in our society where I live have worked against me in one way or another, usually, not all the time, right? But I've had to do maybe more, or I've learned empathy by being in this category. These are a little bit more marginalized. So what I'd like you to do is just take 1 minute. I want you to write at least one thing on each of your lenses of how you're privileged, something that you have that's a privilege, and I'd like you to write more than one thing, but at least one. And then something else that's been an obstacle, or your empathy starters. All right, so does everybody have at least one thing on each side? I'm gonna need some brave volunteers, just a few. You only have to share what you're comfortable sharing. Go ahead.
Supportive society and opportunities which not many would have.
Say it again.
Supportive society from where, like, for where I come from,
Yeah.
since it was a developing country,
Yeah.
and opportunities which others might not have.
Nice. Okay, so supportive society, where you came from. Awesome. So that's your privilege.
I put this kind of on my left side, and it's come up so many more times than I expected, but the fact that I'm not religious, and a lot of people try to convince me that, I mean, I respect everybody's religion, of course, but a lot of people try to convince me that I'm lost or a bad person or less of a person for not being religious, and can see it as a personal attack to them.
Yep, for sure. So I'm just going to repeat a little bit. So she's non-theistic, or I don't even know, but she's not religious. She's not religious. I don't want to make an assumption. And that's more of a challenge. You're not saying that, that's a challenge. So essentially non-Judeo-Christian, not being religious. Totally. Were you going to say something?
Something different, I would say. I'm a vegetarian, and sometimes people really don't understand why.
You're like, where do I begin? He said he's a vegetarian and people just don't understand why. For sure, yeah, the world might not just instinctively cater to you. Totally. Anybody else? Go ahead.
On the left side I've written, English is not my first language. I've heard that a lot, but I can speak very well. I don't know. So, and other thing is, the place I come from, India, so I was not married until 30, and I used to hear it, why not married until 30?
I love that. So, okay, can I share both of those? So I'm going to repeat it. She gave me two, kind of more of the obstacle, which is your left side. I'm getting a little bit confused here. One was that English is not her first language, even though she can speak English really well. Yeah, absolutely. Then you're automatically, what is the disadvantage there? Even if you fully understand the language, what is the assumption that's being made about you if English is not your first language?
That I cannot write or speak something well, or so that they can understand.
Right. So the assumption is right away, like, maybe you're not smart, maybe you can't write, maybe you can't understand. That's super insulting, obviously. The second one I really like too, and I haven't heard that one brought up in a while, which is she got married later than other women, right? At 30 or after 30. So why is that, I don't want to say a negative, but why is that more on the obstacle side instead of the privilege side? I'd be like, girl, that's a privilege. Just kidding.
It's not following the norms, so it is against going the flow of the society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're not following the norm. Women are supposed to be married, and by a certain age. Anybody else?
This is kind of related to that. People choosing to not have kids and being told that's totally natural.
What's wrong with you? You don't want to have kids? Yeah. Super, super inappropriate stuff. So can we all agree? These are just the things that make us see the way the world is. And they color how we see the world. All you have to do is just be aware of it. Some people can get a little, again, the fragility kicks in around our privilege side, like, oh, do I have to like feel guilty because I'm this or I'm that? It's not about feeling guilty. You don't have to apologize to anybody because you have privilege. We all have some privilege. You all walked in here. We all have some privilege. That's not the point. It's being aware of it and knowing how you can speak up for those maybe, or be present for those that have had to do the emotional labor already just to get where they're at. Is not the same playing field. So we're right at kind of, what do we do with this information, right? We know that it's out there. We know that we have part of it. We're all programmed this way. So it's kind of about taking the action. I know not everybody here is white, and that's great. But I do want to talk about white fragility specifically because it's so kind of controlling and overarching in the world that we live in today. And Robin DiAngelo wrote a book called White Fragility. This isn't the first time that it's been talked about by any means, but I like this quote of hers that says the most effective adaptation of racism over time is the idea that racism is a conscious bias held by mean people. This really spoke to me growing up as an idealistic little, like, we're going to change the world and save the planet and everybody's going to be fine. Like growing up in New York, and I was on the same, we saw different colors everywhere, heard different languages everywhere, different sizes. I just thought it was normal. And so I did think racism must just be these evil people. And the problem is that it's not. Like, we're all programmed with our biases. So you just have to be aware of when that kicks in. I don't hate men because I see a man at a park when I'm alone. I need to be aware of, like, do I need to be concerned right now? Am I going to be in an area where my safety is at risk? You have to do that assessment, or am I just jumping to conclusions because of experiences? The antidote is lifelong, and it's engagement, humility, and education. So talking to people, proximity builds relationships, getting to know people that are different from you. I like this analogy. Try and think about everybody that eats at your dining room table or comes and sits in your living room. Do they all look and sound the same as you? If so, then maybe you need to mix it up. Figure out your own way of participating in other people's lives and circles and cultures. We want to interrupt those microaggressions when they happen. So when you hear the jokes, when you hear the offhanded comments, that sort of a thing, that's your moment to say, like, we don't say that anymore. Here's why. Like, don't ask somebody if they're pregnant. We're not going to talk about people's bodies and shapes and sizes. Some of these things might be really obvious to you. The best thing that you can do for anybody else is say something, because the person that it's happening to, think of a time when something's happened to you. Anything, or maybe you witnessed it. You feel this big. You just want to run and hide. It makes you feel awful. And in your mind, you're trying to think, like, is something wrong with me? Am I being too sensitive? Am I going to out myself for being different and the other? By speaking up, that's your opportunity. There's going to be ways in your work life that you can incorporate this. You might not all be in HR and not necessarily hiring or writing policies, but certainly these laws that we make in our companies and in our organizations breed either the hate and the misconceptions and the microaggressions, or they say we don't tolerate that here, and this is how we're going to get rid of it. So how you construct everything well thought out is really going to tell a story. Even when it comes to hiring, people are getting rid of names now. Kate Goldman is a pretty bland name. Would you picture a Kate Goldman, I don't know, in sub-Saharan Africa? Probably not, right? So even with that, there's something that comes to mind. So we're getting rid of those. It's simple. Lose the binary. When you're signing up, who's ever had a job? Nobody? Okay. We've all had jobs. You have to put in your gender/sex. Get rid of that. Or add in other. Again, just reiterating, if you have an ounce of privilege, use it for good, for somebody else. The organization that you work for or the teams you create are a model and a reflection of you. So you speaking out every chance you get, that courage that you have for somebody else who's not speaking, is going to do wonders. That's the only thing that can change anything else. It's about language and action. So we think about the words that we say, they matter, pronouns matter, gendering matters, microaggressions matter, they cut people down, and doing something differently matters. There's nothing inherently wrong with the word equality, but it's a lot different than equity. Knowing this gets you empowered. You're a tiny bit more empowered to stand up for somebody who doesn't know it.